Call it a new dawn in a new day in BC politics. Voters and parties and candidates in big, densely populated areas like Metro Vancouver could have even more say in who gets elected in future elections than they do now, while their counterparts in rural BC could have less influence in our legislature than they do today.
We took big money out of politics so that people could be back in the center of our election process. Now I firmly believe, we need to take that next step and say to our voters that no matter how they vote, their values will be reflected and represented in our institutions. 40% of the vote should not mean 100% of the power. It should mean 40% of the power and everyone working together for positive outcomes.
They won't tell us how many votes we'll have. They won't tell us what our riding boundaries will look like. We have really no idea what we're being asked to vote on. So we're suggesting to people that rather than take that leap into the dark, stick with the current system and let's have elections that are fought fair and square.
Sometimes Elections BC is asked to administer referenda or plebiscites between elections, and these are often conducted by mail.
The political battle lines are drawn. A mail-in referendum supported by the NDP Green Coalition will ask British Columbians to change the way they elect our provincial MLAs.
This fall, BC will vote whether to change from our current first-past-the-post system to a system of proportional representation. Right now,
voters have two choices. You can say yes to first-past-the-post majority rule and stay with the voting system that has been in play in BC for 140 years.
People who support first past the post like the fact that it tends to generate majority governments. Majority governments are able to get things done. We have a parliamentary democracy that concentrates already a lot of power, and if you empower a parliamentary government with a majority, it certainly can accomplish a lot.
Or voters can say yes to proportional representation where all party and candidate votes count.
Whereas if you have a PR system, you vote for the local candidate who may or may not win, but regardless of that, your vote is going to add to the total votes that go to that party, and that is going to have an impact on the amount of representation or the number of seats that they get in the legislature.
Voters who like PR will be asked to pick one of three operating platforms: dual member, mixed member, and rural urban. Two of the platforms have never been used anywhere in the world. They offer different combinations of majority vote, MLAs selected by party bosses, and single transferable votes. If PR wins, the NDP and the Greens will determine which method is used.
What they're saying is, trust us, we will do right by you. Well, that's not fair. They should actually have a specific proposal of how the system is going to work. They have no number of ridings aren't decided, the regions and the boundaries aren't decided, and what the other rules are going to be, they aren't decided.
Well, I would say this: all three systems are better than the system we have now. And I like all three of them in the sense that because every way that you can vote, all three of them will give you some sort of local representation.
The real test is, will voters participate and mail in their referendum ballots when they arrive in the mail? Voting covers a 6-week period to the end of November. On the UBC campus, where many students will be voting for the first time, there's a mixed enthusiasm and confusion about the vote.
Oh, I only know a tiny little bit about it, but not much.
No, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, proportional representation?
Okay. I'm not familiar with that.
Oh. You haven't heard of the proportional representation referendum?
Oh, I heard, but it makes me fall asleep every time I hear about it, so I don't really know what is it about.
Critics of proportional representation say it creates constant minority governments and enables extremism, giving birth to one-issue parties who can get their foot in the door with seats in the legislature and control the agenda. In Germany, where there's a PR system, an anti-immigration party got 13% of the votes and 94 seats in parliament. In Sweden, an anti-immigration party got 18% and holds the balance of power. In Italy, where a PR system has been in place for years, they've had continual minority governments with 60 elections in 70 years.
Proportional representation is complicated, it's confusing, it leads to perpetual minority governments that we can't get anything done. It allows extremist parties to get into the legislature and have a platform for their hateful views with as little as 5% of the vote across the whole province. where they could never win a single riding, which we have right now under first past the post.
So I think there's extremism no matter what the political system, but the reality is that if you have it in your society, it'll show up in your political system. It doesn't matter what kind of political system you have.
Those favoring first past the post say communities like Kitimat, where LNG Canada is promising $23 billion in royalties over 40 years for the BC economy, that town will be swallowed up in a larger riding and have less influence in the PR system. They also fear with minority governments and possible special interest parties, it'll be harder to attract investment in BC. Pro-rep supporters disagree.
In contrast, proportional representation forces policies to be put forward that actually have majority support in the House, and therefore majority support of the population. I dare say that we actually may end up seeing more stable policies, a more stable investment climate moving forward under proportional representation.
Well, if the Green Party right now, which got 17% of the vote in the last first past the post election, if they had 15 seats in our legislature, we wouldn't even be talking about LNG, in my view. It would be over already, because the Green Party would have had the ability to negotiate and make sure that there was no possibility of LNG happening.
Mail-in referendums between elections have a notorious low result. This one has a winning threshold of 50% plus 1. With 40% participation or less, it means this very important right to vote issue could be decided by 1 in 5 voters or less.